We are still very much in the thick of it with the Cinequest Film Festival, as I've been on a list as a media person to talk to people who are independent filmmakers. And today is one of those episodes. Really, really excited to talk about the indie film Born to Lose. Quick plug up top. Just want to remind everybody, which is very, very apropos as we're talking about the arts and what it can do. The highlighted charity for this month is Kids and Art, a organization that helps pediatric cancer patients through the arts, through art education, through advocacy and art activities, and helping kids in a very, very tough situation. They're based out of California, but they've stretched out to start programs all over the United States. And you can learn more about them by going to kidsandart.org, spell out the and. Kidsandart.org is where you will find more information to support, to share, and to learn about this wonderful nonprofit. If you happen to join the Broken Brains Patreon, then you get a couple of cool things. One of the cool things, the coolest of all, is that 50% of your donation will always go to the charity that was being highlighted in the month you joined. And that will be true as long as you are still a donor in there. You also get some of the perks as a paid donor. And anybody who subscribes to the Patreon, paid or not, does get immediate access to the videos of these interviews that goes out to you at the same day, generally, that these come out as well. So, all right, well, on to the interview. You're going to love this one.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, here with you again so we can talk about the intersection of psychology and culture. And as you've been noticing with a lot of the episodes lately over the last few weeks, it is a good high point for film festivals this time of year, particularly Cinequest and some other, just lots of opportunities I've had that are super cool, and I'm super grateful not only to have them, but to share them with everybody that is out there. Today, we're going to be talking about the film Born to Lose, which was premiered at Cinequest in just recently, I should say. And this is a great film that we're going to get into. I'm joined today by Joe Zentil, and who's the director and writer, and then Csurgo, who is a writer and producer on this film as well. Guys, thank you for being here, by the way.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's the type of film that I really like to watch myself, but I really like to talk about on the podcast because it's very much into the way that the characters are thinking, the relationships that they have between each other, and a lot of the drama that happens, although there's a thriller aspect to this. But the most exciting thing for me is watching the choices that get made on screen. I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a heads up about what it's about. It takes place in a small town of Western Kentucky, and we're following around a character, Andy Logan, who is a young biker and kind of low-level drug dealer. Gets into a lot of trouble with a local bigger deal drug dealer, but also we see after the death of his father, and I like this from your description here that was put out. Andy inherits nothing but debts, bad habits, and then eventually also a classic motorcycle that is all broken down. He starts to rebuild that with a family friend of his dad, who has his own traumas and backgrounds, and so as he's rebuilding that and also trying to escape a sort of ticking clock scenario where he's about to get done badly by this local guy, and just lots of other stuff that is happening as well. How's that description, guys? You can amend it or add to or take away from. Feel free.
I think you summed it up pretty well.
This, like I say, one of the things that struck me right off the bat is this is a film about making choices, and often bad choices, which we can see, I think, right from the get-go when it comes to Andy. Is he seems like one of these guys that's not only making poor choices, he's maybe even noticing good choices whiz by and making the opposite is what it strikes me sort of right out of the gate. And that might be a good way to start talking about this film. What were your thoughts with this type of protagonist to get into the story? What made you pick somebody who was in this scenario, and what'd you think about him?
I'll start. So this film was largely inspired by real life people that we know in our day-to-day lives, and people that I knew through the bike community, and people that I had met through various rides that I go on. And I started to notice a trend in the stories I was hearing, and I ended up not only finding it compelling and obviously a great well of inspiration to make the film, but it felt important to tell these stories. They felt that they were largely unheard, and it felt like it was a big sort of collective voice of people, and there was sort of this gap, between classic bike films and then maybe the more commercialized stuff you see on, the big TV networks. And it felt like a good time and place to tell this contemporary bike story, but it was also a story of just like being a 30-year-old in America and trying to forge your identity, and dealing with, the bleakness of middle America and living in that sort of post-industrial wasteland. It was inspired by a lot of real life stuff.
Yeah, and I would say too, like one thing that I've been really attracted to in storytelling, and I think reveals something about my own, inner world, is like I really love when we take very sensitive people and put them in harsh, unforgiving environments, and seeing that clash of, the interior world and the exterior world. And I think Andy at the core is a very sensitive person, but has been raised with, these values which make him feel like he has to be a particular kind of man in the world, and clearly that clashes against who he actually is by nature.
It's something I've noticed after and years of my own experiences working with people who are caught up in addiction, particularly in some of those other areas, is they're actually often really sensitive individuals, because emotional sensitivity leads to a need oftentimes to find a way to cope. And when you're in a culture that doesn't allow you to be sensitive, or that's what your worldview is, sometimes some of that coping, it turns into self-medication with drugs, with alcohol, things like that, and also other self-destructive behaviors oftentimes.
And to your point, poor decisions.
There you go. Right. Judgment is definitely different when you're going through some of those things. One of the things I noticed about Andy as a character is, although he is selling drugs, he is using drugs, he definitely has got, chemical intoxicant abuse problems. But that was not him. And what I mean by that is sometimes that is the bulk of a character, when it's like, but that was just, I felt like supplemental to the problems and the patterns of his life choices. And I think sometimes those are really conflated in the story. It's either, oh, drugs are a fun part of the story, or drugs are the bad part of the story. But this seemed to me to be almost a more realistic, like the drugs are here, but that without those, it's not necessarily like all his problems are gone.
Yeah. I think Joe and I had a lot of conversations about like substance abuse and the use of drugs within the film. And I think to your point too, like we didn't want to glorify them, but we didn't also want to necessarily make them a crutch in terms of like, this character is an addict and this story is about addiction. I think more so it's like Andy as a character, he uses drugs to escape his pain. It's like, it's part of his psychology, but really like the story that we wanted to tell was more about like inherited identity and this sort of like through line of him trying to live up to who he thinks he needs to be because his father was a certain way. And that's really, I think, the greater pain that he's suffering, rather than like, I think the drugs are more sort of downstream from those things within his own psychology.
And also seems to be obviously a commodity in a way as well, to where he is making income somehow, or there's a survival aspect, not only to the self-medication, it seems like, but also saying, I mean, you could say the family business, if that's a not too simplistic way to put that, because his father was in very much the similar cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, in fact, we don't meet his father alive. I mean, the first time his father appears on screen, he has already passed away. He's discovered by Andy, right?
We often say that this is a ghost story because even though we never meet his father alive, he very much drives the narrative, and he drives sort of the central force that brings all the characters, all the, characters that have these intertwining stories. He's sort of the central force of that. So,
yeah. I was curious, you mentioned the intentionality around not glorifying. And I think with these kinds of stories, and if we wanted to call like biking stories and motorcyclist stories as a subgenre or a genre of its own, I guess, in film, anything that talks, you have a lot of the kind of hyper masculinity, the drug use, the criminality. And I feel like it's fair to say a lot of fiction does glamorize this, whether or not they say they do or whatever. But a lot of times that's supposed to be the interesting part of the story. And at the same time that it drives this story with the violence and everything, there's also the other side where sometimes a story is so bleak that you're just like, oh my word. And you guys, throughout the whole thing where there's still there's a bleakness, there's lack of glorification, and yet at the same time, there's a real vibrant connection that you feel to these characters. And I'm just curious how you were sort of balancing that out with avoiding the glorifying and then still telling a story that we wanted to watch, which I think you did very well, by the way. I did find it that way.
Thank you. Yeah, I think to Joe's earlier point about telling a story about people that we knew, I think it's like you don't, like you I think we always talked about just doing these people justice. And I think there can be sort of the tension of potentially glorifying them or bringing it down into this sort of like, oh, this is just a narrative engine in which I'm trying to tell a story through. But I think it's like really to respect the fact that these are like this is the best attempt at showing that these people actually exist. Of course, this is like a made up story, but it's like this is based off of living, breathing people we know, and I think like real life very, very rarely falls neatly into either of those categories. Sometimes we feel like, yes, our life feels like a movie, or the cinematic quality of it, and other times it feels very mundane and boring. And I think for us, we always want it to be gritty but true.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add to that. I'll say, like, from a technical standpoint, we wanted to focus on all these kind of like nuance issues that pertained, to his character, and they're these slow burn kind of more meditative issues. But to balance that, we had the through line of this like very driving narrative and the whole plot with the drugs and the motor, and they kind of balance each other. I think it gives the film like nice latitude.
Mm-hmm. I think that this kind of messaging, in my mind, having, I've met a lot of young men, and we're aware, I think, culturally of the sort of risk of masculinity being taught to young men in one way or another nowadays. I like seeing messages like this to where, once again, you're not glorifying some of the traps that guys can fall into to say, here's what I need to do to be a man. And yet at the same time also showing like another side to that, if you can, be trying to find a healthy masculinity, which is sometimes harder to nail down than the toxic versions of it, which are pretty egregious and obvious to see sometimes if you're looking for them. But they're sold to young men nowadays. They're packaged and sold to say, here's some things to say this makes you a man, versus like actually finding yourself, which is what Andy has to do through this experience. Doesn't have to, but we're hoping it does as we watch.
No, very, very much. That was the intention. Like we talk a lot about our work, sort of confronting modern masculinity, toxic masculinity, all that sort of stuff. But like, I never want our films to feel didactic in any way. Like it's not, this is how you should go live your life. I think it's sort of like you want to get people pulled into an emotional state of an understanding of this character. And it's like, of course, it is about Andy forging his own identity as a man in the world, but it's also just like him figuring out his shit, and it's like how much like can we just understand him as someone who's struggling to like figure out who he is in the world? Because I think that's sort of underlying a lot of when men go online to search for like what are YouTube, how to be a man, and come across these characters that are like very unsavory and want to sell them something. For us, it's like we'd rather just give them a story in which they can see like, oh, I see myself in that, and oh, like yes, I've made a string of bad decisions. I could make a different decision by the end of it all. Who knows?
I agree with that largely because I think it's important that I want people to watch this and be like, oh shit, I've gone through this or I'm going through this. And I don't feel if we can help someone or relate to someone with something difficult they're going through, I think that's why we need film. That's a success to us. Like we're making this for the audience. We want people to not only enjoy it, but relate to it and perhaps walk away with something from it.
So that leads me to something I found very interesting, which was the character of Jed. Jed comes along, who's the old family friend, old friend of his dad's, but they're obviously estranged. And this does give Andy an exposure to maybe a different kind of guy than the guys that he usually would spend time with in some important ways, maybe not completely. But I also felt there was a strength that Jed didn't come in as this like sort of, I don't know, gleaming white knight mentor. He's just a guy, and there's a mentor aspect to their relationship, but he's also not perfect in any way, shape, or form as well. And yeah, I was curious about the work that went into developing what Jed was the role he played in the story.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, Jed was always meant to be a character. I mean, like it may be a story that's centered around Andy, but yeah, Jed, I think certainly as a man who's gone through various iterations of having mentors and figures in his life that have had some degree of like authority or looking up to, like you as you get older and understand these people better, you also get to learn that they have their own problems, they have their own issues. There are sometimes reasons that why they want to be mentors, that why they've gravitated towards those positions, and it was really important for us to make sure Jed wasn't, again, just this like plot device for Andy to come along to help save him. He was really to like created an extra added level of, complication. And really like we learned that Andy activates something in Jed that's unresolved. And I think that has to be interesting on its own outside of Andy's.
You don't want your mentor to be cartoonish. I mean, I think that's a trap you could fall into.
Yeah.
It's through Jed's imperfection that Andy accepts his own father's imperfection, which is ultimately a major revelation that he has, and that's a turning point in his emotional arc. Yeah. So, and the second thing I'll say on that is they have this like relationship where they almost coexist. Like they both learn and take something from each other. And even, I don't want to spoil it, but the gesture he makes at the end is also part of that. Like it's not just a material gesture. It becomes a larger like symbolic gesture.
I found one of the things that I noted as I was watching it is like when they were arguing, there were they have this relationship, certainly not free of friction as they're sort of going back and forth. I was like, some of the time I'm actually agreeing with Andy and some of the time I'm agreeing with Jed, but neither one of them all the way, which, well, it just made them more interesting to me because it's like that seems more like people you run into in the world, is that it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like nope. Oh yeah, there you go. As far as relating to their point of view, I thought that was very interesting and well done.
Let me add something to that. It was very important as filmmakers. We didn't want to make a a right or a left statement. The statement is what you underscored. It's the point that the argument exists, the dialogue exists, the debate. And that's what it's about. It's about the conversation. It's about the communication. It's not, so.
And the sort of any kind of like political conversation was always meant to reveal character. Like
Yes.
Jed's sort of very strong idea of like self-responsibility versus Andy's sort of like abdication of it. And then of course that informs how both of them have shown up and decided to live their lives.
There's a line between them when they're talking that I found very interesting when Andy expresses that he feels like all the shit happening to him, that he feels like he's cursed. And then the quote, as I wrote it down here, hope I got it right, it was Jed says to him, "It's not a curse if it's your own damn fault." And it showed kind of the difference between here's someone feeling very out of control. It's almost like all these things are completely happening to me. And then someone else is just like, no, you're just doing fucked up things. And so trying to see in between those two. Yeah.
How many times in your own life have you sort of, spun your own sob story, and then you have to realize, no, wait, this is my, that's an intentional statement, and I think that's an important moment of realization within the character, but also, as real people, that's an important life lesson, for anyone.
And for me, I also really related to the feeling, both feelings are really relatable, but when it's being told like, hey, you just need to make good decisions now, abandon the bad and move forward with life. I could also empathize a lot with Andy, who's like, okay, that doesn't help me today, that within a certain number of days, someone's going to kill me if I don't practically solve this situation. And I'll say relatable. I've never maybe been in that exact situation. However, I think that we've been in situations, probably all of us, to where it's like, okay, but I'm in the middle of trying to figure out what to do with this mess. It's not, I can't just call a blank slate and everything that I've done is all cleaned up. We kind of have to do it at the same time. One of the differences that I thought it was accentuated there is as they're both working on repairing his dad's bike, it's sort of ostensibly this is just being done as a tribute to his dad. Although from Andy's perspective, this is a way out of a desperate situation. Maybe I can sell this. It's a classic. And of course, Jed's not stupid. He may have the other intention, but he knows. And it hit me that this was also Andy sort of carrying on the things he'd been taught. Is like, here's something very meaningful, but I need it. It's a commodity. I need to move on. I'm making decisions out of despair and anxiety and fear. And that just seemed like that was an extension. Here's a thing that maybe we would automatically think, oh, this is from my father. This is something special. And he's just like, this might get me to survive the month to the next day, day-to-day survival kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's not overly sentimental about it. And then even earlier in the funeral, when he's with Derek at the funeral, he's talking about how he's already sold his dad's bike and he's used the money to pay for the funeral. And, so you just have there's no surplus in his life.
There's, what's the old expression is like robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly.
Referring mostly to money, but this is like his whole existence is that to where that, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the relationship he has, with his sister. You talked about the realizations he goes through about his dad and the way his dad made choices, what that taught him, and the way it affected also his sister. And then obviously we see his choices really playing a big role in her experience as well. What kinds of aspects to the story did the presence of his sister and her situation play?
Julie for us was always meant to be this almost sort of the counter to Andy, where Andy is like this deeply sensitive person who's like really floundering. I think Julie has this incredibly quiet strength to her that has managed to navigate a world that wasn't made for her to thrive in. And she's sort of like done her best, but she's also reaching like a point where she's questioning if she wants more. And, I think ultimately we still call this it is a film about family. And I think Andy's greatest realizations end up while of course it happens between him and Jed and that influence, but I think like his own internal change happens when he understands like the impact he's having on the world, and specifically through Julie. So yeah, I think for Andy specifically, like Julie has to be this almost like she is the it's his understanding of the consequences of his actions, and also like his father's actions. And if he continues to live in this way, he's going to continue to create this trauma and pain in the lives around him. But I think we see Julie as this like very strong character. I mean, she obviously she goes through arguably worse conditions than Andy ends up facing, but we see that like she sort of is able to like maintain a light through that.
She becomes the positive role model in his life. She becomes the beacon, so to speak.
I get the impression she's maybe trying to make much more like progressive choices for her own life, as far as trying to get away from a self-destructive. The self-destructiveness seems more to be like a tornado that's blowing around her, and she's trying to make more healthy decisions, and yet she's really, having everything run downstream onto her from first her dad's choices, and then also from Andy's choices, is what it seemed like to me. Is that a good description of her? That's what I was getting out of her situation.
I think so. Yeah. No, I definitely see. So I think it's a great sort of like visual metaphor. I think like Andy ultimately is operating like a tornado, where she's like existing within a world of like many tornadoes.
Yeah. And and you guys tell me if it's too spoily. She's in her own tough situation as well. Can I talk about that a little bit, or is that, I don't want to get too revelatory if you don't want to, about her?
I think you're good to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, tell me if it's still editable, so tell me if I go too far. But she is actually in a relationship with the is it Roddy? Is that his name? The drug dealer who's coming after her brother.
To us, Roddy personifies like the ego. And he's an example of when your head gets too big and your neck breaks. He's very much the antagonist of the film, but he represents a much bigger symbolic reflection on, as I said, ego and how that sits in our day-to-day life and our contemporary world.
I know that for me, I often find villains more scary, when they're real. When it's like a real, like this guy's out there. This guy really exists. I mean, you get really fantastical bad guys, but then somebody who's like, oh, that guy's a real guy.
Well, because we focused really intentionally on not giving him a gun and not it's the violence is all very psychological. And if you watch, the scene in the living room, for example, if it feels very intense. And when you go back and you watch it again, you realize it's two people talking in close quarters. And those are the kind of films that Pierce and I gravitate towards. And we intentionally took, something that's historically been reserved for genre, and that sort of bikesploitation and the bike world, and we really set out to make like a proper dramatic film and make all the motorcycle stuff kind of sit secondary to the characters and the story being properly developed and giving them the proper nuance and attention they needed to tell the story correctly in the way that we wanted.
Yeah, when you have genres and devices that are like that, I do see a lot of, and some of these are enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but that's a whole nother thing when it's like, oh, we're letting maybe the genre do the heavy lifting instead of the characters.
And I'm not slamming that. And part of the preparation we did before even writing this was Pierce and I sat down and watched a stack of DVDs of like 60s and 70s films, and they were great. But ultimately it has very little to do with what we did.
You mentioned also that you'd said that's something that you've witnessed a lot and based a lot of this on people you've known. Are you a biker? Are you in the is biker the right word? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I
guys
don't know
wrote
if
the
it's
movie,
the
and you don't
right
probably
word
know
or
better than
not,
me.
but yeah, I'm into a very kind of like specific niche. I like vintage Harley stuff. I like custom choppers, 50s to 90s kind of stuff. But there's a big community for that, and I'm friends with a lot of people in the world, and making the film, everybody was so gracious, lending us stuff, and whether they were extras or giving us parts or giving us whole bikes. And this whole community has just proved that, the grassroots and putting effort into, having relationship with your peers, and like it's all worth it. Like we've built, something really, well, I don't want to say we've continued something that's happened for many years before we were alive, but it's a beautiful tradition, and I love bikes, and I love the people that ride them, and they're really interesting, special, trailblazing kind of people, and
Yeah, that. Go ahead.
yeah, it just gave us just such a well to like to work out of, and it's just constantly been proving fruitful. And the more people that the wider the audience reaches, and the more people that see it, like the bigger the discussion gets. And to me, at Cinequest, one of the most rewarding parts were actually patch members or chopper dudes or guys that rode their bike to the actual premiere coming up to me and putting their hand on my shoulder and saying, "Hey, like the authenticity is here. Like, thank you for like the cases he's holding are correct, and the 65 is correct, and the like, like whatever little detail they gravitate towards, like that's so important to me." And hearing those compliments, like that was one of the biggest check marks for me, because if I was watching a bike film and something was off, I'd be like, "Hey, that's fucking not right,"
Yeah. One of the things that I liked about that was it part of the sense of that style of community that I got was that it didn't only showcase, here's the problematic people that are riding around on bikes. Andy certainly, Roddy certainly, that culture, that side of a culture that has attached to it. And then you've got like Jed, and when I really enjoyed the part where they went looking for parts. And he's kind of like, I saw this guy ride. I don't know him, but let me trick the waitress and give me his address, and then we'll get there. And that guy did not look anything like Andy or Roddy or anybody, and just a normal guy who's like, and so it gave this balance to it. And that was just that was just a charming kind of interaction to see happen there.
Yeah, so that's 100% based on a true story. A friend of mine who's in upstate New York antique, Harley Davidson Indian parts dealer. That's one of the things him and his partners do. They go around to these diners and they tell the same story, and sometimes it leads to a pile of gold. So I hope I'm not giving too much away. Hope I'm not ruining his business.
Come on and be like, now everybody's doing it.
But that's a true story, and I will say the opening sequence is a true story, by people I know. So things you think would be made up are 100% true. So I will say that. I will brag about that.
Well, and the connection that I saw there, that's what made me think of it in terms of community, is there's no sense of them taking advantage of this guy. They just got clever in how to find him. And it hit me, anybody who you've ever known out there who's enmeshed into a culture or even a fandom or whatever, that was another moment in the film where I actually made a note of, now he's mentoring. They initiated, here's this guy, stranger, and like, hey, we're trying to fix this bike. It was my dad's. And it's like, I'm in, and let's talk bikes, and let's talk this, and I want to help you now, and we're friends now, sort of, that kind of thing. It captured something. I think anybody who has passion, you can see that when you connect with a kindred spirit, so to speak. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. And in a way, it's a second chance. You know, he kind of has a second chance, and he wants to right the wrongs of the past.
Um, I love the role that community can play, especially in a story that is about any type of personal journey or coming of age or anything like that. How did you guys approach that? Just the general sense of who's in Andy's bubble and how does / should he be approaching them?
Yeah, we were really intentional about making this film, obviously, because we were on a shoestring budget, and we didn't want fluff, and it's almost the first it's like a, you know, it's a film where we're with our main character for 99% of the time, so every person in his life is intentional and reveals his character and progresses the narrative.
And I think too, I mean, so much of, again, the early conversations and while we were writing this script was like, we're making this for bikers first. Like this is a film that has to pass their smell test before it does anything for a wider audience. And so yeah, so many conversations just were, does this match the world, you know, that Joe knows so well, and like when forming people like Derek and Tabitha and all, you know, all these people, it's like, yeah, I think it had to be true to the world itself. So like the community that Andy exists in, everyone had to feel as real as he did.
Mm-hmm. I had another piece of dialogue I wanted to ask you guys about. And I'm a big fan of dialogue, and with these, the vast majority of movies I watch in my life, I don't get a chance to sit down with people who wrote it and say, tell me more. So I'm glad to do that now. One of the characters at one point says, never ride out on the road you came in on. And I want to ask you guys about that line.
Yeah, so that's once again, that's a real life thing. My personal mechanic and mentor in this bike world, says a version of that, has said a version of that to me throughout the years, and he partially inspired the character as well of Jed, so it made its way into the dialogue very organically. Actually, I never. It's not like we built around that. We kind of got to that moment, and then it felt right, and it happened in this very kind of like almost like impressionistic kind of way. So,
what does that mean to you? What has that meant to you before you put it in the movie? I mean, I know there's lots of people in my life, I'll hear them say a thing and I'll be like, cool, that's the thing they say. Other things they say, I'm like, I kind of use that a lot.
I think it boils down to like, you need to continue the progression of your life, and you need to accept the fate, and you need to keep moving. And it's about not dwelling, and it's about personal growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a powerful story, and I think people are going to find things to carry forward with it. I wanted to ask if you guys could tell everybody a little bit more about kind of what comes next. I know you've got another festival you're going to hit, and then if there's anything you can share with us about a lot of listeners who can't make it, long term, where would we watch to see when we're going to be able to get this, or people are going to be able to see this in their day to day?
Definitely. I would say check us out on Instagram, Born to Lose _film. We're posting all the updates, all the festival stuff we're doing. We have our teaser up there, different iterations of the posters. We're sharing behind the scenes stuff. That would definitely be the best source. We also have borntolosefilm.com. And you could check out our production company, strangecustoms.com, at Strange Customs. Pierce is not on social, but I'm also on Instagram. You can find me. It's just my
You can
name.
get to him through you, or just get to
Yeah.
you, or both.
If
Hopefully.
you're interested in him, you can come through me.
When,
I'm the fan mail.
you guys are showing at the River Run Festival soon, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I believe in it's like almost like just short of 2 weeks from now. We're thrilled to be part of River Run. It's an amazing festival. It's an honor to be screening with, such other awesome indie films. And I'll be there. Dylan Arnold will be there. And hopefully you guys will be there.
Awesome. Well, I always like to encourage people when we're doing these episodes focused on film and storytelling. As everybody knows, I like to highlight different charities and ways to give back to the community. One of the ways you can do that is to get involved with local film festivals, that you can support these kinds of projects. The films that I'm seeing through a lot of festival work, and this film in particular, these are the films that people sort of say/complain that they don't get to see enough and that they want to see more of. So if that's what we want, then let's do it. Anybody out there, Google the name of your town and film festival after it, see what there is. And a lot of film festivals nowadays also have online passes you can purchase in order to view some films even from your home if you either can't make the travels or things like that too. So I'll just put that out there for everybody to make sure you're celebrating the arts and storytelling. As people know, this month we're focused on an arts-based organization that's helping kids with cancer through the arts. And so, so I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing in getting storytelling out there and to give us a chance to reflect in that. And so really, I'd say thank you for making this movie and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I agree with your message. Please go out there, support your local indie theater, watch movies, buy DVDs, buy Blu-rays, make movies, read books, save the world.
Have a good time.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you so much.